Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public, those present and those perhaps that might join us via the webcast this evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of Cabinet here at Maidstone Town Hall, today Wednesday the 26th of July 2023. Usual protocols, no planned emergency evacuation practice drills this evening, so should we hear a signal that suggests such a thing, please consider it to be real and follow the instructions of the Democratic Services Officer, who is now walking away, but I was about to say sat to my right. Please, the usual courtesies with mobile devices that might ring, ping or ding while we're trying to debate. First of all, I'm going to ask if anybody's planning on recording the proceedings tonight. I'm asking that not to prevent you, but just so that others in the room will be aware. And of course, this evening's meeting will be recorded and available for playback on the Council's YouTube channel anyway. I think I've remembered all the usual bits there, so let's get straight into the agenda. Item 1. I have apologies from Councillor Perry this evening. Concerning urgent items, there are a couple of additional documents before us this evening supporting agenda items 18 and 21. Members, I think you all had sight of those earlier today, but if you do need any additional time to consider their content as we move to those agenda items, please do let me know. But with your agreement, I'll accept those urgent updates for 18 and 21. Everybody happy with that? Is it agreed? Thank you. A healthy contingent this evening of visiting members. Makes me think we've either done something wrong or are about to do something wrong, but we welcome your interest, and I would invite you to the speaker's microphone to introduce yourselves and state which items, if any, you particularly wish to speak upon. If you would come to the speaker's microphone, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's come as no surprise that I'm mainly here to speak to items 12 and 13, which are scrutiny committee matters. I may wish to make a brief comment on items 14, 18 and 21.
Thank you. Councillor English, next in the line, please.
Councillor Harper, and I may speak on items 12 and 13, but I'm mainly here for items 14, 18, 21 and 24.
Councillor Jeffrey, could I speak on items 12, 13, 14, 18 and 21? Thank you.
Councillor Spooner, just here to listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mumford. How could I possibly overlook your good self?
It's because I'm only small. Councillor Mumford, I've come here to speak on agenda item 18.
That, I think, does conclude noting visiting members. Item 4, please. Are there any disclosures this evening by members or officers? Councillor Cooper?
I'm not entirely sure whether I do need to disclose it, but I think I will nonetheless. Just relating to item number, correctly, there are so many items on it. Item number 18, the strategic SIL assessments. I have previously disclosed I used to worship at St Faith's Church. Historically, I don't think it affects my ability to make an objective decision, but I think I should place that on record so that to be as transparent as I possibly can be.
I suspect that the need to mention a special relationship with the Almighty is not necessarily confined just to yourself, but Councillor Garton.
Yeah, probably not relevant, Mr. Chairman, but I think I ought to point out that regarding items 12 and 13, in my previous life I was member of that committee.
Poacher turned gamekeeper, duly noted. Thank you. No other declarations? In which case, I'm just going to concern us with a moment's consideration of the yellow pages that some may have attached. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I've skipped one, getting ahead of myself. Let me ask at item 5, are there any disclosures of lobbying, please? Starting with you, Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid, and working down the line.
Item 18.
I have been lobbied on item number 18 and item number 21.
Any more? I don't think I've actually been specifically lobbied on any of those. But yeah, very good. Noted. So what I was about to say, a moment's consideration in relation to yellow pages, exempt pages. We do have one attachment before us which relates to agenda item. It is 24. I don't think we're going to need to talk openly about those sums, and it could all be conducted in the open session in relation to item 24. So everything in the open unless we need to. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Minutes of our last meeting, which was the 18th of April 2023. We've all had them circulated with the papers for this evening. Are there any matters of accuracy that anybody wants to raise? In which case I feel quite certain I can sign them as an accurate record. Is that agreed? Thank you. No questions this evening from residents, sorry, I've missed 8 again. No petitions this evening. On item 8, 9, no questions from residents, 10, no questions from members, and 11, no matters referred to Cabinet for reconsideration. Which brings us to the first substantial item this evening. This is the report of our Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who have been looking at the water management cycle, water management cycle. Councillor English, would you be kind enough to introduce this to us?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Cabinet. Some of you, Councillor Garton, for example, will be quite familiar with this first part of our major piece of work. It's turned out to be something of a mammoth undertaking, and we have a part 2 report, second stage report, which will be prepared during the coming months. However, I think it's fair to say that all members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the working group, which was drawn both from that committee and other members of the Council and the Cabinet members who intended the sessions, including Councillor Perry, and it's a shame he's not here this evening because he contributed significantly to the discussions which took place, as did a number of officers, including Mr. Green, who has I think had a major input into this. I won't go through this in detail as it's rather a long report and it might be easier if members ask questions at the relevant stage. Well, what I would say is that this report covers a number of themes. It asks us to work with a number of stakeholders, many of whom have indicated their willingness to work with the Council across a number of fields, including changes to their approach to development control. And it sets out a number of ways in which we can work with stakeholders such as the Upper Medway Internal Drainage Board and water companies, landowners, to directly address a number of significant issues within this borough. I would say that the recommendations in here, including the ones that actually focus on the type of direct actions that this authority can take, are worthy in themselves, would significantly contribute to dealing with a number of issues that are very high on our residents' agenda, including water supply and disposal, and of course flood management. And actually, in relation to an item further down on the agenda of this fairly packed cabinet meeting, would significantly contribute to meeting some of our climate and biodiversity gains. If you look at the papers here, you will see a number of specific issues which address flood management and biodiversity issues, such as increasing the number of managed wetlands within the River Medway and its tributary rivers, which clearly would help with our adaptation to climate change and also significantly improve our biodiversity within the borough. This report represents a lot of work by members, officers and outside stakeholders, and I believe if implemented will significantly contribute to the well-being of virtually every creature, human or otherwise, that lives within the borough of Maidstone. I think it would be better if I took questions rather than go through these recommendations in detail, because there are a lot of them.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I feel sure that we will be looking to produce a more detailed response, but any immediate questions? Councillor Mrs. Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just really interested. I noticed on page 29 that despite you contacting them on multiple occasions, you didn't manage to work with the Environment Agency in your review. And as chairman of the committee, I just would be interested how you feel that impacted on your review. And when you come back in stage 2, will you be trying again?
Our officers are still trying, and informally, and Councillor Harwood, who has connections for the emergency planning field at the County Hall, has also been trying informally to get involvement from the Environment Agency. Is profoundly disappointing, but the only organisation that has not engaged in any way whatsoever with this review so far is the Environment Agency, which is obviously responsible for a number of these issues, firstly from giving advice on planning applications to right the way through to the enforcement process. We have not given up on this, and we are continuing to try, but it is disappointing, and it's not just us who are disappointed, but the representatives from the wider water industry and stakeholders were very disappointed as well.
Anything else? Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
I was just going to add, actually, I'm just quite pleased to see on here that points 2 and 3, the wetlands, because that's something actually in my division as KCC councillor, we've got a number of these, and we've got one in the pipeline in Staplehurst, and you know, these things don't come about quickly, but we are about to see one hopefully come to planning very shortly. So I was just pleased to see that on here, because it's something that I feel quite passionately about. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Just to mention, it's interesting, as it happens this afternoon, there was a meeting of Kent leaders, and we had both South East Water and Southern Water presenting, and I would make the immediate observation that a lot of what they were speaking about as their way forwards accords with many of the action points that you actually have raised here. There's one action or recommendation you've got there which has got the dreaded pounds, shillings and pence in it, £100,000. Any suggestions where we get that money from?
We did examine Mr. Green quite quite carefully on this issue, and though he may wish to comment himself on this, I'm not trying to drop you in here, Mr. Green, but there was a feeling that there were a number of potential pots we could actually seek as a council so it would not necessarily, at least in the medium term, have to be our own money, although there may be some degree of spending we would have to do. But there were feelings that there were a number of potential pots we could explore for this opportunity. Having said that, my personal view is that even if we were not able to secure funding from outside the council, this is money that will be extremely well spent, because it would show that we ourselves are engaging with this process and bringing forward practical solutions that would resolve some of these issues. But, let's not spend our own money until we have to.
Just for my clarity there, because what it actually says is, as I read it, we allocate 100,000 to be matched by these external sources. And it was
in the first instance, we would have to spend some money, but over the period of the over the period of the programme, I would anticipate drawing in significantly more resources. There would be some cost. It may not be 100,000 in the long run. However, that does depend on us actually being successful in those projects, in actually securing that. There is a risk that would not happen.
But it is intended to seek an allocation of money in the next budget. Is that
in the
actually
immediate,
what it?
We would have to, I think, in this case, spend that money up front. Yes.
Right, that clarity is very useful. Thank you. Any further comments? And of course, now we'll take this away and with everybody's consent, we'll produce a formal scrape response, and it can come back to you. Thank you, Councillor Wrigley. There are other members that wish to speak. I've got Councillors Harper and then Jeffrey. Councillor Harper. Okay. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. I was hoping to speak before the debate, but clearly it didn't go that way. I just wanted to reiterate some of the points, and I won't do that because I won't hold up too much of your time. You all are very aware of the level of importance that this has, and it did have cross-party support. I really wanted to push that point. I also wanted to express my disappointment with the Environment Agency, who clearly have ignored our requests for participation, and ask what additional pressure can be brought to bear with them to participate, because they are very much a key part of the work, particularly for stage 2. And finally, I also wanted to suggest that we need to, it was good to have Southern Water and South East Water at the meetings we had. However, and their participation was very welcome and so forth. But there is so much more that we need to do in terms of bringing pressure to bear on them at a more corporate level than engaging with them on some of their very helpful suggestions. I think we need to be much more proactive in holding them to account. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any further comments? So the pages before us suggest that, well, we welcome the report when we receive it, Councillor English, thank you, and that we will arrange for a substantive response to be put forwards and offered back at a future Cabinet meeting to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Thank you. We can move on to agenda item 13, which is a further matter from Overview and Scrutiny, and this is our formal response to the report on safety in the town centre. It is set out in the pages. I think there are certainly tones of some of the suggestions are either already in hand or something very closely similar to the suggestion is actually the case. Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid, have you got any additional comments to this? I know this sort of broadly fits under your area.
Not really. I just wanted to just say thank you to the officers for their comments on here, because quite a lot of work has gone into this, and it does sort of link with one of the things we brought to overview and scrutiny and the PAC, which is the Public Spaces Protection Order, which we were looking at. And in that committee, I did urge members, and I know obviously there's not many members here, but to sort of spend some time with our officers and stakeholders to look at the work that we are doing in the town centre, because I have done that, and it is very worthwhile, and would just show all the work that goes on behind the scenes that we don't necessarily see to keep our town centre safe. So obviously this is our formal response, and I will welcome any suggestions or comments to it. Thank you.
Actually have three speakers, Councillor English, Harper and then Jeffrey on this item. Councillor English.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Cabinet, officers. Just to start with the comment that the Cabinet members made about the Public Spaces Protection Order, we did have a very useful debate on that, and thank you very much for taking on board the suggestion that we made in relation to today's decision. Obviously, whilst I can't speak to the committee and we haven't formally discussed the Scrape report, generally I would say that I'm content with the response. I would say that in some ways the report on this item was about more drawing things together and making sure that members of the public could all see them in one place, and signposting a lot of the activities that the council was already doing or was in the process of doing, rather than bold new innovations, unlike the previous report. I would however, like to just update members on a couple of points. And the recommendation in relation to the British Transport Police was taken forward separately for various stakeholders, which the council is represented on, including the Community Rail Partnership, at their annual stakeholders meeting held in this very chamber, along with the Chief Executive for South Eastern Railways. The result of that has been a major improvement on the policing, to use the term broadly, of fare evasion on all of our railway lines within the borough. And it was ticket evaders who were travelling to a number of places in the borough to commit antisocial behaviour. So we have already achieved a significant result. Thank you for all the members of the Council, Cabinet and committee members and officers who were involved in reaching out for our partner organisations to secure that very immediate response. We raised it with the Chief Executive of South Eastern Railways, and within 2 days they were springing into action. So thank you for everyone for some good action on that. Just one minor technical point. It refers in the report to Democratic Services appointing a rapporteur for this report. Just an observation. Rapporteur appointments are, generally speaking, in the history of scrutiny committees and select committees, a matter for the committee to determine at the relevant point of time. That is normally how these things work, and that is how it worked when the council had previously had a scrutiny system. That may have been the intention, but it's a little unclear in the wording there that Democratic Services will oversee the relevant appointment at the appropriate time. That's something that will be dealt with by the committee at the relevant point of view. Just a bit of information there. That may have been the intention, but I think the clarification is useful.
Let me just seek a little bit of clarity on that. Mrs. Woodhouse?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you are correct. It would generally be a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, or the Scrutiny Committee would nominate someone outside the committee if they felt that was more relevant. So I think what that is referring to is that would be added to as an agenda item, and then the committee would agree to appoint as a rapporteur, because it's definitely within your gift as Overview and Scrutiny rather than Cabinet.
I assume that's what it meant, but it wasn't entirely clear, so I just thought it was worth clarifying. Anyway, thank you for your response. I expect the committee will generally speaking, be very happy with what has been fed back to us.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harper, you want to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. It was just I assume that the recommendations in the report will be referred and incorporated in the town centre strategy work which is currently being undertaken.
I think this is all really useful contextual background to how we develop the town centre strategy. It'll be in all of our minds. I remind us all that we've got that all-member session relating to that. So as we all get a chance to see that developing strategy, then, you know, I think if there are particular elements of this that want to be emphasised, that opportunity be in front of us all. But yes, welcomed in that regard. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you. Two brief points, I think. Whilst recorded crime in the town centre is dropping, I don't believe that the public perception is, and I know that crime is moving around. So, for example, we're now seeing antisocial behaviour on the river increasingly. And this report suggests that we don't need to ask the public about their perception, views and experience, and I don't really understand why and what we're so afraid of. I really think we ought to be doing that. So it's a plea. Please, can we engage the public and get their views on a regular basis, so that we have a good feedback loop that we can work with. My other key point: the report seems to miss out pedestrian safety from traffic, and I'm quite aware of the number of cars coming through the middle of the high street when they shouldn't be, parking at the end of Week Street when they shouldn't be. And these are hazards, and I wondered if that would be helpful to include something in future work around that. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Yes, I was going to sort of add to that. I think we do resident surveys on a regular basis, and we also, when we have these events in the town centre, you know, the whole point of those pop-up stations is so that we do engage with the public, and our stakeholders are there to talk to the public and get their views. Be interesting to see what else you think, you know, we're all ears, what you think we could do more of to get more engagement.
I'll take a very slightly different tack by way of response there. You know, it was said, look, we know it's improving, but why don't we keep asking them how bad it is? We must start talking Maidstone up instead of taking it down with the negative inquisition. Look, we're realists, we know it's not perfect, but let's actually amplify the progress rather than keep going back to, oh, isn't it terrible? That's my response to you in that regard. Let's talk Maidstone up and stop taking it down. Chief Executive would like to comment.
So I'd like to say a couple of things. Firstly, I think the comment in the scrape is that we don't do an annual survey specifically related to perceptions of community safety in the town centre. It does not say
that we do not interact with the public on this topic. I think what goes on to say is that we integrate that into other survey work that we do. So I think we need just to acknowledge that that is what the report actually says. The second thing to say is that as part of the business as usual work of the Safer Maidstone Partnership, there is a strategic assessment of all things to do with crime and disorder in the borough, including in the town centre. As part of that strategy, we have a very specific priority about improving the position concerning crime and disorder in the town centre. And so when we do the strategic assessment, we have a specific focus on that. And you're right to say that where you take action, sometimes there are consequences, not just reductions where you're taking the action in crime and disorder, but maybe displacement. So our analytics are being constantly developed so that we can pick those things up. In fact, we are the pilot borough working with Kent Police on the development of a crime and disorder harm index, so that we can not just look at the number of reported crimes, but also the harm, because you get different levels of harm depending on what the crime is. And then finally, you mentioned road safety, and from my understanding, that wasn't within the scope of what overview and scrutiny looked at. However, so far as the town centre is concerned, in our town centre strategy, the sort of analytical background to that, we have looked at all sorts of things, including casualties, collisions, whatever terminology you want to use. So just to confirm that we will be picking that up as part of the movement strategy actions integrated with the rest of the work on the town centre strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say on that issue of the apparent non-permitted vehicular usage of the high street just next to us here, that has been raised a number of times. A similar issue actually with the Barker Road temporary traffic scheme, where there's blatant disregard for the traffic regulation order there, and wherever the opportunity has arisen, I know we've been raising that with the appropriate enforcement authorities, principally the police, but others who may have say in that. So certainly not something that is absent to our knowledge. We're doing everything we can. Councillor Garton?
I think surveys are one way of taking public opinion. And if we ask surveys, do you feel unsafe or safe in a town centre, we get answers from people who possibly have not even been in the town centre for a while. I think we all as members, we are participating in plenty of workshops throughout the year, attend plenty of committees dealing with the town centre, and we can take personal vibes from our electorate when we talk to people, when we're going out. And I think it is very telling that I got a letter, a handwritten letter by a constituent not long ago saying, oh, we went to a theatre last week, and after that we had a meal in town centre, and it was such a lovely evening, and we really enjoyed it, and we felt very safe at all times. A spontaneous letter like that is probably worth 10 surveys, and I'm sure that members will have that type of correspondence throughout the year, as well as the negative correspondence.
Thank you. So I think just to conclude, we need to say here is our formal response to overview and scrutiny's recommendations. If there's any further feedback on the our responses, once you've had a chance to digest them, we will welcome hearing the same. But thank you for your work. Can I move us along to agenda item 14? I'm sure most of us will recall there was a motion at full council This related to town centre strategy and member engagement in particular. I think it's probably the most expedient way is to take the visiting members on this before anything further is said, and if I can use the same order again, Councillors English, Harper and then Jeffrey.
I think when this motion was originally discussed, members were across the council were, I think, right to discuss it, but I think it has been overtaken by events to a certain degree, well, to a very large degree. I spent far too much of my life discussing lighting strategies this afternoon. It was very interesting, but I have to say it was a in-depth discussion. So those of us who were concerned about town centre member involvement have perhaps had our concerns somewhat assuaged as a result of this, of there being a number of meetings involving town centre members and another one in the process of being organised to talk about the open spaces and green strategy in shortly. I mean, I make no comment on the emerging strategy yet, that will be massively premature, but I have to say I am somewhat reassured by the fact that there has been the involvement that you did promise, Councillor Burton. I'm so far relieved that this has emerged, but you know, we shall see how it goes. But I think the motion has perhaps been overtaken by events and is no longer as germane as members may have thought it was at the time.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm quite happy with the outcome we've achieved. It was my motion, if people I'm sure remember, to the full council back in April. We've had 2 meetings of the Town Centre Working Group now, and we had the pleasure this afternoon of a 2-hour session looking at street lighting, which to some extent links up to the previous item, my brain's gone dead, about safety and that type of stuff. And also talking about how we may go out and seeking ideas about consultation, which will be held, I believe, in sort of September, October period, which, to be honest, is probably better than do it than in August. So, yeah, so I'm quite happy with the outcome. So, thank you. I think it was a good. We've come to a pragmatic way of working. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. As seconder for the motion, I really just want to take this opportunity to thank you for putting it in place. And since the lighting discussion has come up, I'm going to nick somebody's joke and say it was illuminating. Indeed, it was brilliant.
I don't think we need to pick a fight where none exists. Councillor English, you said events had overtaken the motion. I think they were actually undertaken, you know, because at the time we did say, if you go back to the committee decisions November 21 and March in 22, where the engagement plan that was set out to ensure that ward members, High Street members and others would be involved, I think we have certainly followed through with that, but that was always the case intended to be. No further action required on this? Excellent. Thank you. I think we can conclude that one. Item 15, nothing to report in this matter. 16, similar. Takes us to 17, the Cabinet Forward Plan. Published with the papers. Minor correction to be made from recollection. One of the boxes suggests that a singular Cabinet member will be responsible for something that actually has a wider but it's one of the machinations of the mod.gov system. Is that right, Mr. O'Connell? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Everybody's saying, what the heck is he on about? And I should actually refer you to page, can somebody remind me which page it is? Quarter four finance report, where it is suggested that Councillor Lottie Parfitt-Reid would be taking the lead on that, but actually it's intended to go across all of the packs with all of the members. So forward plan as set out by the papers, unless anybody has any further comments. Is that noted? Noted, thank you. Cabinet forward plan dealt with. Agenda item 18. This is the first time we've actually come to a decision-making process on allocation of SIL money that we have over the last year or more been collecting from developers relating to the square meterage of construction per our SIL charging strategy. We have some money accumulated. We sent out a prospectus to potential infrastructure providers, inviting them to make submissions and bid for amounts from that pot of money. The responses duly received were considered and ranked by a project board within the council, and further separately mediated by an outside evaluator. That culminates in all of the bids being presented, that were submitted, being refined to the smaller number that are on the papers by way of recommendation. I think it's correct to say that Cabinet did also in their own capacity make themselves aware of all of the other bids, and I think we concurred that none of the other bids outside of the recommended list should progress at this time. So I think this evening's focus is around making decisions about the recommendations on the papers before us. I think we're all familiar with what's there. Unless anybody wants to add anything, then I would be inclined to hear visiting members next. So again, Councillor Cooper, did you want to add something to that before we hear from visiting members?
If I can, I think it would be appropriate, because I just wanted to highlight what was on the urgent update that has been circulated to us, because otherwise I think it would be slightly unfair on visiting members and indeed any members of the public either here or watching on the webcast. So there was an urgent update to the M20 Junction 7 upgrade, so I'm sure everyone is aware that this was subject previously to, unfortunately, to unsuccessful bids for external funding. So the figures for Section 106 have been revised, and what that essentially means is that the amount that is requested has been revised down from the SIL funding to £1,836,729 to be precise, which is just shy of £61,000 less than had previously been identified by Kent County Council. Second part is Linton Crossroads, which was the urgent update to that is has provided additional justification in the bid from Kent County Council in the form of an accident and incident records, and there are two appendices which I hope have been circulated. I've certainly had sight of them. And the third and final update is for St Faith's Community Centre. Just for context, Mr Chairman, an additional £100,000 from Community Infrastructure Levy had been requested, however, £50,000 of that can come from Section 106 contributions. So what I believe we are looking at this evening would be an uplift from the original £200,000, which was as per the published papers, to £250,000. And they are the three urgent updates which I hopefully make sense to everyone in the room. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. That was very helpful to remind us of the urgent update. Can I turn to visiting members now, starting with Councillor English, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. As Councillor Cooper says, it's something of an historic moment in terms of allocation of SIL funding. I thought I was going to come here to basically speak in support of the recommendations, and then I was advised that there may be a possibility of a certain amount of double counting going on in terms of the St Faith's Centre project. I'm advised that it may be the case that the money from the Raglan £50,000 there has already been taken into account in terms of the actual construction work, so that would actually only be a net £50,000 increase, which would still leave the project £50,000 short. So I think we need to check whether that is in fact the case, because if it is, there would be something of a slight problem. I'm sure that we would not want this important and very, very important and significant project to fall over at the very last moment for a relatively small proportion of the overall cost. So I think it is important to check that we are actually allocating sufficient, because there is some headroom given the revised reports on the Section 106 allocations, to actually make sure that if that were the case, that we could actually as a council move forward with this. Other than that, I am content with the recommendations on the papers. If there were any decision not to proceed with one of those allocations, I would urge that the Cabinet look at the Hart Street and Fountain Lane issues. If it were decided not to proceed with another particular issue where I've heard there are some concerns been expressed, but that's only if, of course, the Cabinet decide to go down that particular avenue. But I do think those two particular projects are issues that the town does need to address at some point, whether it's tonight or in the future.
Thank you, Councillor English. I think perhaps we ought to just recap what we believe to be the position with the funding in relation to All Saints, which, as per the urgent update, is set out clearly that the request is for an additional 100 over what was originally bid for, and that it is proposed that by variation of a Section 106, which the way this is written implies that that is not yet concluded, so would like to think it isn't taken into account twice because it's not concluded, but that would move 50,000 towards it, and the bid before us tonight is increased by 50,000, the 250s making the 100 shortfall. That's my understanding. Councillor Cooper?
That is indeed my understanding as well, and I'm glancing over at Mr. Cornell, and I think he's nodding along. I think just to add a little bit of extra context, this isn't in the urgent update, but I am aware, in addition to the extra £100,000, 50,000 of which I believe is coming from Section 106, and 50,000 of which we are to decide upon this evening, I understand there is about £31,000 which has been granted already by the ward SIL. So my understanding, and if Mr. Cornell could nod, is that the ward members have agreed that, but perhaps William could either confirm that I'm incorrect or perhaps add a bit more detail. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cooper. That's correct. What you could do with this is you could sort of have a provision to award a little bit more, subject to further fine checking of the details, due diligence to be signed off by the portfolio holder if you just wanted to make sure you had all the bases covered.
Please allow us to pause for a second and just take some advice on the best way of handling this uncertainty. By way of explanation, I think we're all aware that we have representation for the applicant for this money in the gallery this evening, and I've asked the Chief Executive to just seek whether that potential shortfall of a further 50 is the understood position, or whether we have got it covered. So we're just trying to get a bit of certainty. A request to take a 5-minute comfort break has been put to me, so on the basis of granting that, I'll adjourn this meeting until a little after 6:30, 5 minutes or so. Members, if I can ask you to return to your seats, and I shall reconvene this meeting after taking that impromptu comfort break. That has allowed us to give some consideration to what Councillor English introduced to the thought process. We'll come back to that when we get to decision making. The next visiting member to speak would be Councillor Harper, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things which I was going to ask, and I think the answer is probably fairly simple, was about the local seal, because I think in the urban area it's still with the local councillors to make suggestions, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. That's a relief, because I'm going to start doing some work on that soon. I don't have an issue necessarily with these proposals before us tonight. I do think that we need to do work on the integrated transport plan, which is referred to obviously later in the papers with the biodiversity agenda and so on. And I know it's being looked into in terms of the local plan. But I would urge another allocation of this corporate money, that perhaps consideration, as Councillor English said, be given to the Fountain Junction, so where, the Fountain off Tunbridge Road, and the other one clearly, which has been in the papers a lot in the last few months, is a sort of Hart Street, Barker Street, Broadway Junction. Now, I know from the last meeting, which I know David Burton attended as well, that Kent County Council said that the full solution they were looking at there, I think they quoted a figure about, so it was a £200,000-300,000 mark. It wasn't necessarily a massive amount of money, it wasn't in the millions. And I think probably the bulk of the cost of that would be associated with relocating the Broadway News kiosk.
Can I pause you for a second? Yeah. Because I think there's a lot to be said about things that are not on the paper this evening. But if there was an inference of don't do this that is on the papers to save it up for something else, that would be useful, or otherwise. But those others are not on the table.
That was it really. It was just hopefully that subsequent allocation we can look at some of these other high priority projects as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. So my concern is with the two road schemes. I'm very, very happy with the Heather House, and I'm pleased we've got that intervention on St Faith's. I'm very supportive of both of those. The road building schemes. The current integrated strategy is woefully out of date. Life has moved on since, I think it was 2017 it was dated. Life's moved on drastically since then. And yet what we're being presented with are two major changes to our road systems, major investments in roads, in our roads that frankly feel quite piecemeal and based upon very old thinking. We are now in a climate emergency, as we all know. Anyone who's watching the news will know just how bad it's got and will get. So I really do have to question why we're spending money on widening roads. Even KCC accepts that widening roads simply increases traffic, and it also shifts the problems. We might solve congestion at Linton Crossroads, but that congestion will simply move closer into town, where things like air pollution are far worse already. So other people will be damaged by doing that. And I noticed from the urgent update states that there's a load of crash data. If that is the basis for the Linton Crossroads one, well, where's the comparison with other crossroads? I'm sure places like, and I haven't checked, but the Queen's Road, London Road junction is probably far worse in terms of crash data than Linton Crossroads. I don't know, I haven't checked. That's purely based on my observations. So my key point is we really do need a sustainable integrated transport strategy, and that's the point at which we can then start to work out what we do with the SIL money if we want to spend it on that, rather than going down the line of two specific expensive plans that will simply increase congestion within the town centre. Thank you.
So I think my understanding of the précis of what you just said is you do not support highways improvement schemes being paid for by this SIL. Councillor Mumford, please.
Excuse me if I'm not as articulate as I normally am. I'm going to read. To answer a couple of questions that Councillor Jeffries just put to you. Firstly, the IPD was updated 2022. The original is 2016. It was updated 2022, and it's used as underpinning evidence for the local plan review. And while I agree with his sentiments, this is not New Year's Eve, out with the old, in with the new. It's got to be done with some tact, synchronization, that the old one goes out and the new one goes in. And for me, tonight is not the time to chuck out the old one. I've come to talk about Linton Crossroads, SIL, contribution. The reason I've done this is because I attended the advisory committee where I was surprised to see the item was debated extremely strongly, but no one put forward any substance to their concerns. But it finally went through at the PAC to recommend it. I started doing research on it because it is close to my heart. First place I went is, and I could have saved my time, was to KCC. I established that that McDonald surveys in 2016, the junction was reported as overcapacity. That was 2016. It was the second most dangerous crossing of its type in Kent. There are 92 crossings on A and B roads that are signally controlled. This is the second most dangerous one in Kent. What should concern people here, and Councillor Jeffries mentioned it earlier, pedestrian safety. There has been 5 strikes on pedestrians up there, where children are crossing the road. That should concern us, and the junction has also recently appeared on a list of high-risk junctions, so that's where it is. It's dangerous. The project on your paper is recommended for funding, recommended for approval for funding. And I've been involved, heavily involved, in the development and the design, which is now ready to go to second consultation. In fact, you delayed your cabinet meeting. It's out there, and it's second and final consultation. It's almost ready to go. And in your paper, it indicates that delivery 4th quarter of this year. I think it could start then. Well, I know it can start then. And it will be 2 years of agony to be delivered. Last meeting I attended with KCC design team, they were only waiting for the completion of the second consultation and further funding, and they're ready to go. This mitigation is within the adopted plan 2017. It's supported by DM21, SP13, which is part of your hierarchy of development. It needs to support sites 5960, that's H1 5960, and SP12, which is Button-on-Chelsea, that was designated a larger village along with Coxheath. This was the underpinning mitigation. That's in Bournemouth, Chelsea. There was H151, 3 and 4. That is 5 106 is going in. It's a total of over 400 homes already built, and as the IPD recognises, other sites in the local plan will also be affected by the projects. The 106 collection is complete. There's no more you can get out of that. There is only 5 allowed, because this came up when we were transferring 106 to SIL. The other payments have been made in SIL, money you have in front of you tonight. Adopted along with the local plan was the Integrated Delivery Plan 2016, and it was then reviewed in 2022. Both used as underpinning evidence for our local plan 2017, which we operate, and the local plan review. Without it, the Bolton-on-Chelsea and Coxheath would have been found unsound. Within the IPD, I keep pronouncing that wrong. I did say that I don't like reading. This mitigation is described as critical, with a delivery date about now. Short, medium term, it said. Short term, well, medium term was 5 years. It was written in 2016, updated 2022. This mitigation is also critical for us to nominate within our hierarchy of development, and that was Bolton-on-Chelsea and Coxheath. Remember, there is no more 106 money. You now have the money in the SIL. What is important, you should register tonight that in our adopted IDP, it states how this project will be funded. And because it recognised that only so much 106 could be collected, if you look at it, it says it's funded by 106 and SIL. It was the only way it could be funded. That is, again, repeated in the updated version. As I said, you're only allowed to collect 5 106s, and the rest is made up with SIL. I don't think you can morally take KCC to the High Court for holding money and not delivering road improvement, and then withhold money from this. Within your papers, you'll see it scored the highest score, 108, I think, against 80 of any of the projects against the Maidstone Borough Council assessment. We've paid McDonald and Turley for this report in front of you, both advising support for the project. Remember, the local plan was adopted along with the IDP. We must follow our local plan. If you don't follow that tonight, then my vote for that was wasted. Right. It also supports the local plan review. And for reasons that you will find out, it makes the local plan review sound. And the only way you're going to get my vote for the local plan review will be to make the plan sound. And you need to spend the money tonight. I want to finish with a resident's view of Linton Corner, as it used to be called. It's dangerous. It's always been dangerous. We have put down all those houses and made it more dangerous. One morning, a young fella got on his motorcycle and he left Bolton-on-Chelsea, and even in those days there were queues at Linton Corner. He clipped one of the cars, tipped off his bike, across the road was run over by an HGV. The HGV driver never drove again because of the carnage, nor did my brother, who died at the scene. You might say, oh, sorry to hear about your brother. No, I can live with it. Actions speak louder than words. So tonight, there is no reason, logical, policy, or anything I can see that stops you from granting that seal money to Linton Crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. There certainly is some insight that I've gained this evening for your emotion on this particular matter, which I hadn't understood previously. Members, where would we like to start? We've heard all of the visiting contributions. Councillor Cooper, do you want to? I think what we should do is take the projects per the list. We go by the list on the recommendations. It starts with M20 Junction 7. Let's take them one at a time in the sequence that are on the papers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to comment on all of them, but I will comment just on the first one, which is M20 Junction 7 upgrade. On that basis, I've been working quite closely over the last few months with William Cornell and the planning team, so I've been quite close to the detail with this. I introduced a report to the pack. I certainly didn't detect any controversy from anyone with Junction 7. I think it had strong support when I took it to the Policy Advisory Committee. It also fits in with our previous aspirations. We as I alluded to earlier, we've applied twice for funding for M20 for the upgrades to M20 Junction 7. It also fits in quite pleasantly with already planned work, which I understand should be starting at pace in that vicinity. Therefore, I certainly would be very keen that we do move forwards with providing the funding, which is just over £1.8 million for this, and I certainly believe that it will bring a large benefit to motorists and indeed residents and business owners who live in the vicinity of that junction and those who use it every day. Looking around me, I think a number of us probably do come off of the M20 Junction 7 every day. So I certainly would be very much in favour of moving forwards with this and providing the funding, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
My issue with this particular project is about the funding. The need for it, I don't think is, as far as I'm concerned, in any dispute at all. The queuing there back to a motorway lane speaks for itself. My concern here is if we put some SIL money towards it, the money isn't there until the rest of the 106 money comes forwards. I think we've got to be very careful not to create a situation where the developers don't need to bring their money forwards. And I would like to see some certainty around those contributions before we tie up a significant sum of the SIL money that could sit there for some considerable time until the rest of the money comes along, during which time, who knows, there may have been something else that we would have funded and then come back to it with the future funding stream of SIL when everything else is in place. Now that was a bit of a round the houses way of talking it through, but even if we make this decision tonight, there is not enough money in the bank to do this project. And it is contingent upon the developers paying the money, and the way those 106s are written is if the money was found another way, they don't have to pay. And I don't want to take that risk with this hard-gotten, limited supply of SIL money, and I don't want to lock it up and make it unusable because it's committed for potentially a significant time. So 100% behind the project, and if the rest of the money was on the table tomorrow, I don't think I would hesitate, but we don't know when that will be. Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
I can actually see both points of view that's been put there, and I was just wondering if there was any way that we could put some time constraint on, if it wasn't used within a certain time, can we take that money back, or is it once it's committed, it's committed?
To me, the most dogmatic method of doing that is to keep it in our pot and be willing to reconsider this when the rest of the money is there. Who would like to give an officer? Mr. Cornell?
Yes, just in terms of the additional money that's due to come in through Section 106 agreement, the anticipated date for that is early part of 2025. So I think by the time KCC were sort of spending up to the full sum, you know, they would have received the last sums anyway, but ultimately they could proceed with the project at their own risk. I'm sure they would be minded to do that. That's something that we could explore. But also I don't feel that the future Section 106 monies are at risk through us topping up the overall sum with SIL, because if we sort of followed that through to its natural conclusion, the project would never happen. So I don't think that's a genuine sort of line of discussion, really. That's not credible, because, you know, the cost of the project is the cost of the project, and some of the Section 106 sums will never meet it. We know that to be the case.
I don't think that's what I was asking. What I was asking is, if we commit this money, can we put a timescale on committing this money? Not whether it was...
All the SIL allocations that get made tonight, if any are made tonight, they will all sort of be made with a grant funding agreement that will tie the recipient to delivery milestones and so on.
Any other considerations? Councillor Garton?
I'm afraid that with a two-tier local government system, we are very reliant on the upper tier, the Highways Authority, to actually perform what we ask them to perform. And I just wonder what sort of power lever could we apply to make sure that this money will be spent, because there's no point in a time limit and asking the money back, because be it 2 or 3 or 4 years, the money will be less worth than what it is today. Money becomes stale and devalues if it's just been held in a sock under the bed.
For me, there's a sort of a wider principle here with the Highways Authority, huge capital sums and delivery or non-delivery. I've lost track, is it 9 years that they've had £8.9 million worth of funding that we're yet to see delivery, you know, the wheat sheaf. And there's a huge fear of me saying, well, look, where's another few million? Put that in the piggy bank. And we don't actually see delivery of the schemes. And who knows, tomorrow there might be, well, the next round of SIL, there could be something that we think, blooming heck, if we'd have known that, we would have used the money for this. And keeping it in our control until such time as the funding is complete for this junction maximises our options. And look, I think if it was all in place, we all believe this needs to be done, but the money isn't there yet. It's a difficult one for me. Any further comments from members? Shall we, Councillor Cooper?
I think the issue with non-delivery, I think, is a very serious point. And for as long as I've been a county councillor, so since 2017, I've been promised that we will see junction improvements at various points in Maidstone. However, that funding for those doesn't come directly or even indirectly from Maidstone Borough Council. It has been awarded through the LEP, and the LEP keep saying that there is a deadline, but indeed they do seem to keep extending it. However, I do think we would have the ability here, and unless somebody could tell me I'm wrong, to put a sunset clause on this of perhaps 24 months for work to commence. And if work does not commence in that time, that money will come back to Maidstone Borough Council, and whoever is sitting in the cabinet in 2 years' time can then decide how that gets spent, or indeed whether they would want to extend that sunset clause. So I think perhaps that might be a pragmatic way of moving forward with this particular scheme. As Mr. Chairman, you said yourself, there can be no doubt that this is needed. I regularly sit I appreciate that I'm not just wanting to spend the money for my own benefit, but I regularly sit in queues of traffic along Newcut Road, along Bearsted Road, coming off of Junction 7, past Notcuts. This junction improvement is needed. There are plans which I understand will be commencing fairly soon, in comparison to other projects that we've had promised in this vicinity. So I sincerely hope that these can be tagged on, and perhaps we could add that sunset clause onto this funding if that might give us some reassurance that the money won't be frittering away, devaluing at the rate of inflation in a bank account somewhere.
Councillor Garton, is that an indication?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. I think I may be preaching to the converted here, but it is the public who put us in this place by their vote, in that they're saying, well, we don't really mind you building houses, but we do need the infrastructure. And here we are sitting tonight, we've got a big wallet full of money, we want to build infrastructure, but we just don't trust the infrastructure provider. I think that is the conundrum we find ourselves in tonight.
And I'll be honest and say there are elements of that for me, but it's not just that in this particular case. Even if we put this money on the table now, the rest of the money isn't there yet. And I would be more minded to defer this decision until the rest of the money is on the table, in which case it should be click, here's the balance, get on with it. That's my position. So there are some elements of believability and will they get on with it, but it's actually the funding timing. We put this money on the table, but the rest of it is not there. Mr. Corner.
I think with that, the risk becomes if you defer the project will inevitably rise in cost, and we could find ourselves in the same position again. We do have KCC who are clearly minded to get on and deliver the project. They put the bid in, it's a very credible bid. They've tried to get it funded through other means. So I think there is sort of obvious intent from them, and with the sort of update that the balance of the money should be in by the early part of 2025, I think that realistically is going to be more than adequate comfort for KCC to press ahead with the project. So I do feel it could be an opportunity missed if we sort of defer and wait for another 15 months or so.
Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
I think we have to find a way forward here, and I think, to quote Councillor Cooper here, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And I would be minded to move forward with this, but with the sunset clause.
To be specific, that sunset clause would say what?
To commence within 24 months. I think we said 24 months.
Not wishing to put words in your mouth, but I think, Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid, you are moving that we award the SIL money as per the urgent update papers to this scheme on the proviso that works commence within 24 months of today, or the funding will be withdrawn. That's yes? Councillor Cooper is seconding, in which I think we should go to a vote. Those in favour? Those against? But that is carried. We should now move our deliberations to 8229 Linton Crossroads. Does anybody want to lead some thoughts here, please? Councillor Mrs. Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to reflect back on the visiting members, and I think you all raised really good points, and rarely have I heard a speech as a visiting member so impassioned as Councillor Mumford. And I also find myself agreeing, maybe for, I don't know, quite a bit with Councillor Jeffrey, so thank you for the points raised. I too look back at the infrastructure delivery plan and noted on page 3 that the infrastructure requirements in the infrastructure delivery plan reflect the growth and site allocations in the Maidstone Borough Local Plan, which was adopted 2017, exactly the same as Councillor Mumford said. There were approximately 400 houses built in Coxheath, exactly the same as Councillor Mumford said. However, there were just over 1,000 houses built on Fountain Lane, and that is just our side of that. That doesn't take into account the Tunbridge and Malling allocation, all of which demand infrastructure, all of which ask for things via Section 106 contributions that are essential for those houses to be delivered. I'm not disagreeing with anything that Councillor Mumford said. I'm purely stating the bigger picture, which is the bigger picture is the need along the Fountain Lane junction. So I can probably just sum it up a bit quickly, which is that if you're looking as a borough wide as a whole, I can't understand why we would prioritise infrastructure improvement for 400 houses when we're not looking at an infrastructure improvement of 1,000 that's just our side. We need, the SIL pot is a pot. It's one pot for the borough. I think we need to remember that as well as being ward members, we owe it to ourselves to provide for the needs of the residents of the borough. And to my mind, and it might be very simplistic, there lies the greater need.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Garton, then Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Again, I'd like to come back to the speeches held by the various visiting members. And I want to build roads, I want to build infrastructure. That's why I got elected onto this council. So I'm certainly not going down the route of what I understand Councillor Jeffrey tried to suggest, that we do no longer build roads and improve roads. I was very, very taken by Councillor Mumford's speech. I do understand that in order to have a local plan, we must provide the infrastructure. So you are, I think you and I are singing from exactly the same hymn sheet. I couldn't phrase it any better myself. Again, as what I said with the previous item, I've got the great distrust in the delivering authority, the Highways Authority. And maybe Ms. Broom or Mr. Cornell can confirm that the Highways Authority has this particular item on top of their list and they are not particularly keen to provide a road improvement in Fountain Lane. So we are between a rock and a hard place. That is my understanding, that take this one or you won't get anything.
I think a lot of the road junctions in Maidstone do have sort of long history. So, you know, I can't speak for KCC, but my understanding with the sort of Fountain Lane area is the officers have struggled to come up with schemes that meet the criteria in terms of value for money, you know, the sums invested versus the perceived sort of broader payback, not financial payback, but the sort of the dividends provided for the scheme in terms of public, in terms of transport improvements. So, you know, we've conducted this process in a very transparent manner. We've invited bids from all the infrastructure providers, and obviously this was what the priority bid from KCC, and they appear to be, you know, minded to press ahead with it for that reason, because they're quite advanced with their pre-planning. So more than happy to go back to them and encourage them to develop a proposal for the Fountain Lane area for subsequent bidding rounds. But again, I think it's sort of similar philosophy as to what we had on the last point. You know, this is the scheme that the Highway Authority appear to be backing and feeling is the right one in terms of value for money and payback.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have no doubt that Linton Crossroads is a junction which should be improved. I also have no doubt in my mind that the whole package of upgrades to the A229, starting at Armstrong Road, moving up to the Wheatsheaf Junction, the Swan, need improvement. Now, it was some while ago when I was last chairman of the Joint Transportation Board, but at that point it was pointed out to me that improving Linton Crossroads, although it isn't part of the MITP package, is essentially part of that corridor package. So I think improving Linton Crossroads standalone, and in terms, and I speak very specifically about traffic flow, I appreciate the concerns about road safety, is something that really should be done in conjunction with other junction improvements, which I would like to see moving forwards. I also think that, well, I'm also aware that the letter that we recently had from the planning inspector makes reference to development and also makes reference to section 106 coming from that development that's in our emerging local plan that should contribute towards the Linton Crossroads junction. So I actually think there is, albeit I don't know exactly how much, but there is more money coming down the line for this, which perhaps means we can make a more informed decision as to how much SIL we would spend at a future date, and we should reconsider. Now, I introduced this to the Policy Advisory Committee, and there was certainly a divergence of views at that Policy Advisory Committee. A number of people mentioned Fountain Lane and Barker Road specifically. Councillors Cannon and Forecast came along to lobby for that. Now, we can't decide this evening to fund either of those because there hasn't been a bid. There is a danger that if we reopen the bidding process, we can't force Kent County Council to apply for them. But I do think we should strongly encourage them. The Fountain Crossroads is very separate to other junction improvement schemes that we're waiting to materialise, and would function very much or more so in a standalone fashion. On the basis of the funding that's coming forwards, and indeed the what I would see as more pressing issues in terms of pushing forwards to improve traffic flow in other areas of the borough, I don't think I could support this evening, Mr. Chairman, and that would, if we didn't support it, it would leave quite a large amount of money, and therefore I do think we should reopen or re-examine the silver prospectus and reopen bidding at our earliest opportunity. That's not to say we should rush into it, but it is certainly something that I think we should look to. I am sorry that I don't feel I can support this, but I think we're about 90% of the way there. I'm just not quite there in my mind yet. Thank you.
It's my understanding, but I hope to be corrected if I'm wrong, that the pooling rules on section 106s have actually been relaxed. Right, that is confirmed by officers, that is correct. So when the inspector in his most recent letter said, well, I'm not going to change the allocations, that one's happening, but I do think that that site should further contribute to the highways improvement at Linton. That is a valid mechanism for us as a further 106 contribution, a sixth one perhaps. And if that money is coming, well, why would we put still money into it? That just wanted that clarity that the pooling rules had been relaxed. Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
If you've got a seal, you've got that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I suppose I should just make it clear for anybody listening, Cox Heath is actually my ward, so this is something that I've spoken to residents about an awful lot, and it is something that is very much wanted by a lot of residents in Cox Heath. I understand some don't, and it is like many things, it can be divisive. I think I would just like to draw attention to the fact that this upgrade actually will bring safety to that junction for pedestrians, and it is a dangerous junction. The turn right is not ideal, and the pedestrian crossing for children is quite dangerous, as the data shows. So I would be minded to support this application because this is what we have on the table, and I think we should take it. It's here in front of us. Notwithstanding what's been said about Fountain Lane, I can totally accept that there might be a greater need there, but that's not on the table, and it's maybe not on the table because it's not a deliverable scheme, even with the right amount of money. So I think we have to deal with what we have on the table at the moment, which is Linton Crossroads. I think it needs upgrading. Talking about pushing the problem elsewhere, that's why there is traffic light sequencing, and if you speak to the systems administrators for traffic lights, they do look at those things, and when traffic's building up, they release traffic elsewhere. These systems don't work in isolation, so this scheme upgrade would have my support. Thank you.
I believe we may have an additional contribution from Mr. Cornell.
Yes, just with this, obviously we are in a SIL environment now, so I think it will be very difficult to say to developers of other housing sites why they should be paying their community infrastructure levy plus top up section 106 to fund this junction. So I would question how that junction would get funded by future section 106 receipts.
So to be clear, you're questioning what the inspector has placed on record in his most recent letter. You don't believe that that's possible?
It's my understanding that unless it's a sort of strategic site, you know, garden community type arrangement where a site would be taken out of the SIL arrangement, I don't think it would be, the expectation would be that a developer would pay both SIL and section 106. I think that was the sort of premise of the sort of SIL coming in.
Okay, that's not what the inspector put in his letter. That's Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with Mr. Cornell. I have to say I haven't seen the letter from the inspector, but the whole idea of SIL was to remove the requirement for Section 106 agreements, unless it was to secure on-site mitigation. So I'm a little puzzled as to how we would secure Section 106 agreements for off-site works in a SIL world. I'm a little bit puzzled by it, I have to say.
I mean, SIL was introduced to get around the pooling rules, but they changed the pooling rules as well. It's a very complicated matter in its own right. But okay.
I don't think the idea was to overcome the pooling requirement. I think they introduced a pooling requirement to force authorities to go down the SIL route, I think was the original intention of that.
Right, we're going to need to draw this one to a conclusion shortly. I just want to go through my list of points to make sure if there's anything that hasn't been covered. So we've covered the matter of the inspector saying that another developer should contribute to this. I make the observation this by some considerable margin is not the worst junction for congestion currently. It's not the worst congestion. I want to use the phrase to the Highways Authority, finish what you've started. You know, we have heard said that this is part of a chain of improvements that, you know, go all the way down. The Wheat Chief said half started, well, less than half started. I cannot understand why this is coming to the top of the pile when the money is already on the table for that next piece down the line, and blatantly there is no progress, and I am really reluctant to put more money into the Highway Authority hands to have another project on the boil until we actually see some conclusion and some spending of the money they've already got. Finish what you've started. Pooling of 106s we've covered. Currently, I think the safety issues on this junction are predominantly pedestrian. I think currently, in terms of the severe ones currently. You know, when I observe that junction, you do have school children dashing across that road, disregarding the crossing that is there, as is their nature of doing. They're the points I wanted to make. Is anybody wishing to move on this item? Councillor Cooper.
I am quite happy to move that we don't at this stage support the SIL funding for this particular item for the Linton Crossroads, Mr. Chairman.
I would be happy to second that on the basis if we added something to the effect at this time. It's not a no forever, but I don't believe it to be the priority. No further comments from anyone? We'll go to a vote. Those in favour, please. I count that as 3. Those against? I count that as 1. Any abstentions? I count that also as 1. That concludes that matter. And so now we move on to Heather House Community Centre redevelopment. Councillor Cooper, you're indicating immediately there.
Thank you very much. Heather House is certainly something which members not, and I stress this, not just representing Parkwood and its immediate vicinity, but Heather House is something, and indeed many community facilities, is something which members of all political persuasions and across various parts of Maidstone have been very keen to support. I think it supports not just the local community, but it supports our aims and ambitions as a council as well. When I introduced this to the Policy Advisory Committee, I don't recall any derision regarding it. In fact, I do recall fairly unanimous support for Have a House. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I would be delighted to support this, and I would be happy to move that we support the SIL bid for Have a House Community Centre. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
I'd like to second that, please.
Any other speakers on that? Councillor Garton.
Heather House has been dragging on for years and years. I think we need to do something about it.
So I think we've already, as Cabinet, made the decision to proceed with the scheme. This is actually the choice of funding to support that decision. As many of you know, I started my life as the councillor in Parkwood Ward. I'll sit here and say it's not the scheme that I originally envisaged, but I do think it's a positive get on and provide a decent new facility, so I'm supportive of this award. I think investing in community infrastructure is one of the often overlooked and important things that we do need to do. So I believe I have a mover and a seconder. If there are no further comments, can I take that to the vote? Those in favour of awarding this? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Which leaves us with the funding bid for St Faith's Community Centre redevelopment. We were hearing from Councillor English earlier that there was some uncertainty about whether a certain 50,000 from another pot had already been taken into account of the numbers. What I would propose, if members are minded to support that, and perhaps we'll all speak individually to that, that if we were minded to support this bid, that we would actually consider what is on the urgent update, which is the 250,000. If it transpires that there is a further shortfall, then that could be considered as a separate decision. Perhaps an individual member decision may need to quickly go in front of a pack again because of the 28-day rule. 28 days, Mr. O'Connell? Yes. To be re-aired. But, you know, we should deal with the certainty of what we have in front of us, which is the 250. But that's if members are minded to support this. So that would be the way forward I would be suggesting. Councillor Cooper, I think you're indicating.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm sorry that I've sort of butted in first on each one of these, but I'm probably have been closer to the detail in the lead up to this. So I think first and foremost, so I mentioned earlier, I previously worshipped at St Faith's Church when Jackie Craig was the vicar there. It wasn't because of the new incumbent that I started worshipping elsewhere, just for record. I certainly know that he's a gentleman. What I am sure of is that St Faith's Church and their congregation have done fantastic work in the community, specifically Ringleston. And indeed, their main place of worship has moved from the town centre to what is much closer and close to the centre of essentially their parish. I remember the old building that was there that was quite rickety. I remember being in there a few times. I remember one Christmas party and it quite clearly wasn't fit for purpose. Quiz nights used to get a little bit drafty in there. The new facility is fabulous. I haven't visited it myself, but I've seen plans. I know that they do an awful lot for the community. And I can't think of many community centres that actually have been able to source so much funding, do so much fundraising, and push themselves forward in the community in this way. Once we've made a decision either way this evening, I do look forward to visiting. I must apologise to Arthur that I haven't come to visit, but I felt that it might have prejudiced my position in voting this evening had I been down there. But I'm really keen that we support this. I think just like Have a House, it supports our aims and ambitions, and it allows the church and the voluntary sector to support their own community. Therefore, I propose that we move forwards with the £250,000 that, as per the urgent update this evening, I'm happy to propose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do I have any other speakers or indeed a seconder at all? Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Yeah, just to concur with Councillor Cooper and second.
Thank you. I think supporting this community infrastructure is consistent with the last decision we just made, supporting community infrastructure the other side of town. I'm supportive of it. Are there any other speakers before we go to the vote? Right, those in favour? Unanimous. During our deliberations, here and other times, we've talked about the importance of opening another round of bidding, and also, perhaps some review of that process as well. So, shall we ask that we add that to the forward plan to bring forward proposals to that effect? Councillor Cooper.
Can I just confirm? Will that be something that will be considered by PAC and a subject to an individual member decision, or I don't quite understand what you're proposing, but I think perhaps William does.
Mr. Cornell.
Yeah, appreciate the spirit of what's being said. You want to do a round two as soon as possible and perhaps do things slightly differently. I don't think we would achieve a great deal of value now doing a review of what's been done before. Necessarily, I just think start with a blank page, and otherwise I just think we'll sort of create a bit of an industry around it, and I think we can go straight to round two and take on board, the spirit of the cabinet of what they're looking to achieve with that second bidding round.
I don't know. It does feel to me like we should. This is the first time we've had a round of SIL awards. I think it would only be right to at least do a debrief on the process and just reflect what lessons are learned. Whether that means we would actually do anything differently, but I do think that. I mean, it's taken far too long. I think from when we set out the prospectus to reaching this point, all sorts of factors, including an abortive meeting along the way. I think and I remember well chairing the meeting when the outline of the process was agreed under a spy committee or whatever it was at the time. There was certainly no mention of having an independent adjudicator reviewing the internal decision making of this council, and that certainly added a significant set of pressures and didn't make the decision making any easier, to be honest. So I think there are some things to consider whether we would do it in the same way again or otherwise. Yes, we welcome your comments.
Just an observation. When we're bidding for SIL ourselves and we are the evaluators, then I think having an independent view can be helpful. I appreciate that not everybody will share that opinion. That put to one side, I think it's entirely possible for us to produce a report which sets out the proposed prospectus and process for a second bidding round that reflects the learning. So I'm suggesting we do it all in one step rather than multiple steps. And I'm suggesting that partly for efficiency, but also partly because I think there's a sentiment from a lot of what has been said this evening about pace to move to a second opportunity for people to bid for the resources that are available. So that's what I'm suggesting that we do, that we produce a revised version that reflects the learning, and we do that as soon as we can.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much. I think the sorry, I've got something in my eye. I think the Chief Executive's approach sounds reasonable. Whilst it's really easy for I say us, I think all of us as a body of councillors and indeed members of the public as well to say, oh yeah, but you know, we should be funding X, Y and Z. Unfortunately, if we haven't had the bids come in and we can't support them, I'm also cognizant of the fact that it's taken, as one officer pointed out, it's taken 3 years before something's been put in front of the cabinet member to make a decision. So, but perhaps if we could have a report to the next Pied Pack, which will be early December, September, perhaps not quite that soon, but a report so that we, I don't want to time limit it, I don't want to rush it, you know, but I'm also conscious of sorry, apologies, I shouldn't have said that.
Councillor Mrs. Russell.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. Obviously, SIL's a pot, so, you know, you've got your pot, and then you'd have to build more houses again to accumulate another pot. And right now, our pot at current interest rates is quite good and growing, you know. So I think we should open a second round. I think we should look to, you know, for areas where we have built the most housing, where there is the most need, because we're well aware that that is the infrastructure that's required, meanwhile growing the pot, and then perhaps get to some places where we can afford, I know it's Highways Authority, but we could afford a whole thing ourselves, and then we have complete control over it, and we can actually deliver infrastructure for people.
Yeah, to take on board all that, I think we can certainly bring something back to the Pied Pack in the autumn, if that's okay. Just a sort of word of caution on this, you know, we had 21 bids last time, and not many came through as being realistically fundable. And the reason they're not fundable is that they weren't well advanced business cases. They didn't, schemes didn't have planning permission, didn't have detailed costings, didn't have contractors on board, and so on. So I just sort of urge a bit of caution on this, because I wouldn't be entirely convinced that we're going to see a materially different set of bids coming forward, and also we've got to justify decisions made this evening and so on and so forth. So it might not be the best thing to absolutely rush at this, but obviously that's councillor decision, but it's just worth bearing in mind that we weren't, you know, inundated with, you know, shovel-ready schemes to fund last time.
So to summarise, I think we'll be asking for a debrief, a wash-up on lessons learned from this process, a consideration of improvements to the process, and an early reopening of another round, but not being prescriptive about the timescales. And I'll use this opportunity to vent a further frustration and express my view on the urgency to revalue SIL. We need to redo the calculations and see whether we're collecting enough developer contribution in the first place. That has been requested multiple times. I know it might not be the top priority with the local plan running, but nonetheless, the urgency of that, I think, is huge. So if we could record those actions. I think that concludes that item. Everybody happy to press on for a little bit? Yeah. Agenda item 19, Communication Engagement Action Plan. Councillor Mrs. Russell, that's your bag now, isn't it?
It is. I took this over from Councillor Parfitt-Reid. The Communication and Engagement Strategy Refresh and Action Plan has gone through the CLA pack, and you will see that it is more of a refresh than a redo, but it does set out the key communication and engagement activities aligned to the council's strategic priorities. Obviously, it's a living document, so it's developed with Cabinet, wider leadership team, and anything new can be added as and when they occur. One thing that came through from the pack in 2.6 was a figure that was used for opportunities to see. That's now been clarified. So it's not 644 million people that have seen a bit of mess that's gone out from Maidstone Borough Council. It is opportunities to see. So if you're scrolling on your feed and Maidstone Borough Council flips by, that will register. So that was a good point well made from the pack, and that's been picked up and changed. But yes, I'd like to hope that you can support that this is voted through. Thank you.
Any comments, anyone? I think I'm in the territory of what is there not to like and not to approve here. You've moved.
Oh yes, I move as per the papers.
Seconded, Councillor Cooper. If there's no further comments, everybody happy? Those in favour? Unanimous. Item dispatched. Excellent. And so we move to item 20, corporate planning timetable. Now this should be the test. Who spotted the deliberate error in the papers, just to see that actually the executive summary should read 2022-23 instead of 23-24, and the recommendation should read 23-24 instead of 23-23. So please be mindful of that typographical correction. It's the logical years, not the ones per the papers. Corporate planning timetable. Mrs. Woodhouse, could you just give us a headline flavour, please?
I can, yeah. This is the document that Cabinet considers yearly. Previously it would have been policy and resources as well. So it's where Cabinet considers, do we want to rewrite the strategic plan? Do we need to refresh it? Or are we happy with it as is? Last year we reviewed all the milestones and they went through all the packs and had really heavy debate and were rewritten to reflect the priorities for the next 5 years. We're recommending this time that we don't revisit the strategic plan as it's only just been refreshed and gone through in detail, and we're heading to all-out elections as well, so we can see there could be change on the horizon. The other thing it sets out is the timetable for the budget and when this will be going to committee, and I've developed that in consultation with Mark, and obviously Councillor Perry's been involved as well in terms of when things are going, and the timetable is slightly different to normal as we try to get things done in September into December, ready for a decision in February. But it's set out in the table at 3.3.
Okay, that's very helpful summary. I think the main takeout here is not doing a strategic plan review refresh this time around. If you ask you to speak on this item, I didn't have you down as this, but I will allow it nonetheless.
Sorry, David, but obviously John's not here tonight. When we discussed this last week, the other thing we pointed out was that we need to make sure that when we look at this, admittedly, after the election, some stage in 2024, look, we sort of adequately resource it, because if people who are on the council remember the work we put in 2018 or so, 2018-19, when we were doing the current strategic plan, we had, I was going to say dozens of workshops here, but we spent a lot of time in, member workshops, working with the officers and so on. So we've got a very good plan as a result, but it was very resource intensive in that period. And I'm just cognizant, obviously, we'll be discussing over the next few months the budget situation. So what we don't want to find is we get into 2024 and we just don't actually have the resources to do it. So it's just something to bear in mind. It would be really good to update it when we've got the new council, but it is quite resource intensive. That's what I just wanted to mention.
Completely agree with what you're saying there. Councillor Garton?
I mean, when we drew up the initial strategic plan a few years ago. It was, yes, a great effort across the party spectrum. All the parties more or less signed up to it when we were still under committee system. It is a great plan. I think we, as a Conservative Party, certainly can still subscribe to it. Why change something while it's good? We are not engineers. Engineers like to improve things which are already functioning all right. We just want to keep going on and do good things for the people of Maidstone. We have elections next year. If whoever is elected next year wants to draw up a new strategic plan, then let them do it. I think it's pretty good. Maybe it needs a bit of brushing up, but generally it's fit for at least another decade.
Thank you. From the chair, I move as per the papers. Seconder. Councillor Garton was quick. Approved. Those in favour? Done. Thank you. Agenda item 21, Biodiversity Climate Change Action Plan update and costs for achieving net zero 2023. Ongoing piece of work here, reviewed and revised twice yearly, once yearly, has been through all of the PAC committees for comment, and I've seen a summary of those comments back. I think probably good to take visiting speakers before we say too much more, and I'd start with Councillor English.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't think there's any doubt when we look around the world and see Greek islands burning and all the effects of strange climatic conditions with hailstones in Milan in July and similar climatic conditions, that there is a serious amount of concerning events around the world. That's why this council cross-party took on a while ago the burden of coming up with a plan to do our part in addressing this. I don't think there's any doubt that the plan that was adopted was a good plan, a robust plan. I'm not going to criticise or cast aspersions. All I'm going to say is that I think we're all agreed that there is a certain degree of urgency and we need to move forward as a council on these issues as quickly, but without being stupid, but as quickly as we reasonably can. And I think we all agree on that. What I would say is that looking at the paper, it wasn't immediately obvious that all of the costs that are actually in the document are actually costs that can be directly attributed simply to the need to deal with climate change, and it wasn't immediately obvious, which is I think one of the comments that the PAC made, that what costs would actually have to be undertaken, for example, in relation to modernising, repairing and maintaining buildings or replacing our vehicle fleet, that would have to be done anyway, because regardless of climate change, one has to renew one's vehicle fleet periodically. So it would help tremendously in going forward to actually have that broken down into what costs we would actually have to incur anyway for a number of programs, and what are actually purely additional costs, because it may well have been that the council has undertaken that calculation, but it wasn't immediately obvious looking at it from outside and looking into the papers. All I would say on that is that it also might have been worthwhile at some point looking at the costs of not undertaking some of the actions that we would otherwise that we are planning to take, because clearly in some respects there are going to be costs of not undertaking an action, in terms of, for example, not undertaking certain flood mitigation measures. That could be a potential cost to the council's land and buildings and to the borough as a whole. So that is another entire piece of work, I understand, but we do need to actually look at what it might cost us not to take action in certain areas, and that didn't come through in the report. Now, I admit that is quite complex to look at in some ways, but it is, when you're looking at a whole lifetime's programme of action on climate change, something that one needs to consider as an organisation or a local authority. What is the cost of not taking action? Because it might be quite substantial. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, people, last Wednesday when we had the council meeting, I raised some concerns on this. I think it's a really good report, and there's a lot of information. But actually, when we were meeting at Corporate Services PAC, we asked detailed questions, as one should do. And then actually we stood back, and because the danger was we were going to miss the wood for the trees. By homing in on all the individual items there, of which there are 38, you sort of miss the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, 2030 is literally just around the corner. We know it, it's, and to actually implement some of the items here and to actually achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, the actions are actually going to have to be starting to be implemented by 2028, 2029. And then you think, we're already halfway through 2023. So it's a very short window to get all of this work done. And what we've felt at the Corporate Services PAC is perhaps we should home in and ask Cabinet to spend a bit of time looking at the items here which could achieve the maximum impact, so that we can target our resources. Because, the council isn't massively endowed with staff and resources, we all know that. And trying to work on 38 separate things, there's a danger that you could be halfway through 38 things in 2030, but actually hardly any of them have been finished. And so I would urge you, perhaps over the summer period, to look at the report, to look at all those items and try to itemise the ones which will actually have the biggest impact. Now, there's a couple of ones I'll just reference. Action 4.2 is about recycling bins in our offices. Now, if that is true, that we don't actually, after all these years of recycling, have comprehensive facilities in all of our offices and premises, then there must be something wrong. And that, I think, had a red mark by. Another one which we referred to on an earlier report this evening is the integrated transport strategy. And we all know that transport is one of the biggest issues where you get carbon, and looking at an integrated transport strategy as a priority potentially can offer ways, I would imagine, of reducing carbon. Now, I know the council has done quite a bit in terms of encouraging charging points in our car parks and so on, but anybody who watched the BBC programme last night about electric vehicles would know that the biggest constraint to moving over to electric vehicles by 2030 is the issue of charging. And that sort of would link into work we could perhaps do, looking at an integrated transport strategy, working with Kent County Council and others as an urgent item. But as I say, I would just urge that we keep our, we lift ourselves up from the detail, look at the maximum ones to achieve real decarbonisation by 2030. And actually, I just got one question, was the public sector decarbonisation scheme, I assume we put the bid in now for it based on the information here. I didn't know if we had any idea of when we're likely to hear back from the government whether we've been successful or not. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd answer that one very quickly, but we'd try and wrap it all up in one debate.
Yeah, just very quickly, we haven't submitted the bid yet. The bid window opens in autumn, according to DEFRA, so we're preparing the bid for September, October time.
And I think what that doesn't portray is all the work that has been going on up until this point to develop schemes and thoughts to be able to put the bid. So that's kind of like the last stage before the award. A massive amount of work has been going on preparing suggestions and detail. The public aren't going to see this until they're actually delivered, but what we need to reassure ourselves of is loads of work to these aims, to these ends is going on. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. As I think someone just said, the world is burning, quite literally, and people are dying. 61,000 died last year in the European heatwave. We have no idea how many are going to be dying this year. This feels to me like the most important thing we should be doing at the moment. I'm not going to go into detail on some of the points at all, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. Firstly, this is a climate change and biodiversity action plan. The biodiversity crisis is potentially bigger than climate change. We don't really understand it yet. 70%, 69%, something like that, of wildlife disappeared within most of our lifetimes. Not all of our lifetimes, but most of our lifetimes, certainly mine. And we have got to a point where, and in terms of the biodiversity, there is not much in the plan on biodiversity. There is one section out of 7, I think. So I really think we ought to start thinking a lot harder about that. Secondly, we are now clearly in the realm of needing to put into place far more on adaptation, as well as continuing the mitigation, the decarbonisation bit. We need to start changing the way our town and borough are to cope with the impacts of runaway climate change, because it's clearly running away. What we do have, though, is a good plan, reasonable plan, but it's not getting the delivery it needs, judging by 2 actions being complete, 38 being incomplete. And many of those target dates are not only being missed, but they've already been changed from previous years. So it's, if you compare it to the previous plan, you can see many of those bits now being missed. We do need to do everything in our power, and this report says that we're not. So my plea is, not only do we need to get a real grip on this, but we need to make sure that the resources are there and available to James and all the teams to deliver this. I very much welcome the detail on decarbonising. I think that's a very interesting set of numbers and breakdowns of costs. I would ask that you consider the formulation of a plan to deliver that. What is the phasing of this? How is it going to be funded, and so forth? Because I couldn't see that within the papers. And then finally, there was a nice bit, an interesting piece on the carbon footprint of the council, and that is important, but even more important is the carbon footprint of the borough. And I'm not just talking the national produced stuff, but actually overlaying the local knowledge on top of that. We had a discussion this afternoon on house building. The embodied energy to build houses needs to be factored into our thinking, not only to build them, but what's the running costs in terms of carbon. So I do implore the council to start thinking about the totality of the carbon we are emitting, as well as reducing our own carbon, and as well as improving biodiversity and making sure that we are adapting our borough to the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, this has been brought to every pack, not least my own. I wish to thank James Wilderspin for the work he does. I appreciate that he gets a tough time on occasion, because this isn't always at the top of everyone's list of priorities. However, I do think this is an important issue that the council are dealing with, and that members of the public do expect us to deal with. And it is vitally important that we strike a balance between dealing with this particular issue and dealing with the other issues that our residents face. I think we are striking that balance, and I think we have made very sizable and important progress to date. So I'm certainly happy to note the progress in this report, and I thank people for their hard work on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably differ slightly in the fact that this is integrally important. The only thing I'll say is we had the urgent update where it went through all of the packs, and I think similar to what Councillor Harper was saying, some of the packs, if you look on that, they were asking for another sort of level of prioritisation. So I just wonder if maybe, you know, obviously this was a really good start, and then we've done actions, and we are where we are, famous saying, but we need to move forward, and I think maybe it would be really good if we could have this redone with like an extra level of prioritisation, as that was quite overwhelmingly the feedback that came from a lot of the packs.
Thank you. Don't like to differ with a colleague, but I would put more emphasis on the importance of this issue to every one of us than my colleague Councillor Cooper has just done. And as I've set out many times, it must be central to every decision that we take, not a separate agenda. I think it is of the highest importance. I want to pick up on a few of the things that are said there. So the prioritisation feedback, I think it's a bit disingenuous to say we've only done 2 out of 38 or something, because it doesn't recognise the 36 that we're working on. You know, there's a lot of work going on simultaneously. In a perfect world, we'd have them all ticked off, but we're not in the perfect world. There's an enormous amount of work going on to progress these issues that, you know, for example, all of the work that has been done on preparing options for decarbonising our own estate that you have to do before you can even bid to get the funding to then think about the delivery. There's a lot that goes on. The charging thing for, you know, electric vehicles was mentioned there. You know, we have to embrace the opportunities, and I think there's, you know, for example, Town Centre Strategy has got a huge piece of work relating to lighting. Well, if we're going to mess with the lighting columns, that's the perfect moment to see where the opportunities exist to have charging within lighting columns. Now, not all of the lighting that we're going to look at is in a place where vehicles access, but that's the kind of thing that we've got to search out the opportunities, and that ties in with work the KCC are doing. I think they have some pilot funding for ultra low emission vehicle support, and there's opportunity to work there. So, you know, I won't be happy. I won't think, you know, we can't give this too much priority until we declare the climate emergency is over, and we're a long way from that. So, you know, I think we've got to do everything we can to accelerate our efforts, but there is good progress here. And, you know, there's plenty of us that need to be contributing to the positive effort of moving this forwards in every place we can. One particular area that worries me, that I will highlight, is our design and sustainability DPD. I in particular remember the origins of that in the earliest conversations, which were fueled, for example, about, you know, why can't we have policy that, you know, talks about solar on every new roof, rather than relying on planning committee to be the one that suggests it as a condition every time it gets to that stage. But of course all the officer delegated decisions don't have that because we don't have a policy. Well, the draft of that takes us no further forwards in that direction. And I think we've got to be bolder as Maidstone. Just because MPPF has a hierarchy that says, well, if you reduce energy, you don't need to think about renewable energy, I don't think that's good enough for Maidstone. And we can have a row with the developers about viability, but I actually think it's what people want. I mean, how many times have we all heard on the doorstep, well, why do we have to think about a solar farm? Why don't we put it on every new building as standard? And I don't think we're facing that head on. So there's more work to do. We need to roll up our sleeves and go to battle on some of those things, which will in turn make the biggest differences. Meanwhile, we endeavour to do everything possible we can to change the things that are within our gift in shorter terms, such as decarbonisation of our fleet and of our estate. Councillor Cooper, I think you did move to note and
before you attempt to dispatch the item, as several references have been made this evening to the very lively engagement via the PACs. The PACs have also sent you some recommendations, and they're in the urgent update. And I'd just like to highlight in particular those that have been set out on the third page of the urgent update note and those on the final page. So you may also want to consider your reaction to those recommendations.
So starting with the third page, in particular, let me just get the context of this correct, the Quality Bus Partnership, which doesn't exist anymore. Urban Heat Iron Sustainable Integrated Transport, providing further information on cost. Comments on right. Maidstone Quality Bus Partnership. So the Integrated Transport Strategy Review is something we've been pushing to get work underway. Mrs. Brew, will you able to give us an update on next steps there?
I'm happy to. So I think there are three. The first is that the existing integrated transport plan is being updated to ensure it's consistent with the local plan that was examined recently, and no doubt the same will happen with the main modifications. So that's the first thing to say. I think that is simply a process of ensuring consistency. The second thing is that the County Council are currently consulting on their local transport plan arrangements. I've probably got the wrong name there, but it is the county-wide, local, LTP5. That consultation is live, and it's important because it sets the context for any refresh, replacement, whatever approach we want to take for our own local integrated transport plan. And so we need to, I think we've been guided to say that we will wait until we know the outcome of that before we start any comprehensive work on our own. And I'll say to everybody else the advice that I have informally given to the Cabinet, and that is that we need a much more authentic alignment between what we say in our plan and what we're actually prepared to do in practice. I don't think I've made any secret of that advice, and I think it's fair to say that that will be quite a challenging conversation. But if we were to take the same approach that Councillor Garton referred to in terms of the approach we took to our corporate strategic plan, then I'd hope we'd find a way of getting a means of cross-authority support to whatever is produced at the end of the day. So I think I'll probably leave my comments there.
I think it's almost a shame that we need to have the discussion at this level in public, but I think it is important to have it on record exactly, what the challenges of getting this work moving forwards are. Chief Executive has quite rightly pointed out that the existing integrated transport strategy gets a top and tail exercise to make sure it aligns with the local plan. That's almost a technicality, but it falls massively short of the root and branch review of transport strategy that many of us made our election pledges on and have asked for. And it is of immense frustration to me that we are not sleeves rolled up and working on that now. I don't know whether I should be asking my colleague as cabinet member or officer team here, but with regard to LTP 5 being out for consultation, I think it's 5, isn't it? What is the mechanism for this council's response to that? Under what timescale?
Well, the mechanism is the same as for any consultation where we choose to make a response, and that is for a report to come through the PAC and Cabinet. So I understand that the preparation for that is in hand, and I would simply reiterate that the guidance I've been given is not to initiate a major piece of work on our own plan until we're clear about what the context is with the county-wide plan. I can change that in terms of priorities for officers if that's what you would like me to do, but that was not the guidance I've had up until now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do concur with what the Chief Executive has said, and I think it is also worth noting that the strategic planning team are working through the tremendous amount of volumes now which need to be completed at rapidly approaching deadlines to get the local plan to the stage of adoption. It would be rather silly for us to push forwards at this stage before the plan is adopted, and indeed before we know what the county-wide context is. However, it is a frustration of mine that we aren't moving forwards with this work, but I think at the moment we would struggle to do so in any meaningful fashion without wasting taxpayers' money on something which might be superseded by work that County Council's done and may be fairly meaningless.
I beg to differ. Councillor Mrs. Russell.
I just wondered, as a way of moving this forward, at the moment the recommendation is obviously just to note, but reading through the things that came from the different packs and taking that recent advice on board, I wonder if we go with the recommendations that came through from the Corporate Services Pack, which is the action plan implementation updates and indicative costs of achieving net zero for the Council's operations be noted, and the implementation of the action plan be expedited selectively, and delegated authority be given to the Biodiversity and Climate Change Manager to submit a bid to the public sector decarbonisation scheme for funding to facilitate decarbonisation of key council properties. I wondered if that recommendation on page 170 that came direct from Corporate Services Pack, I would propose that.
You're reading from the agenda rather than the update. Yes. Do we need to give delegated authority because you're already doing it?
It was in terms of missing the next packs. The next packs will be in September, and it's possible that the window for the bid opens at the beginning of September. So it was just to not miss an opportunity.
So, easy one to pick off as you've moved per those words. Seconded by Councillor Garton. Is that agreed? Tick on that one. Yes. So we're back to page 3 of that urgent update. So with regard to the succession of the Quality Bus Partnership, we've had this discussion in public a number of times, and we're waiting for KCC to make the move. It's their jurisdiction, isn't it? Unless...
There's a slight update since this report was written. There's going to be a new focus group set up with the local bus services and planning and myself to discuss issues and discuss planning routes, and that's yet to be put into effect. But the idea is that there'll be someone from KCC who sits in on that and then can take the issues back up to KCC and still have some involvement with the bus partnership that's in Maidstone.
That's not my understanding of what was to succeed the Quality Bus Partnership. Government said they're scrapped and put in place a different mechanism which we rely upon county to instigate, and they haven't. Councillor Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, this is the first I've heard of that. My understanding was very similar to yours, was that the Quality Bus Partnerships were scrapped and there is a new system which we're waiting for county to come back to us on. However, I do understand that Canterbury has the new, I can't remember what it was to be called, I apologise, but I do understand that Canterbury has the new Quality Bus Partnership up and running. I have chased Tom Gilbert, who was the officer who's leading on this, and he is still awaiting response from Kent County Council. I will do some digging and perhaps I'll pick this up with James tomorrow to see quite what is proposed and whether indeed that is what we are referring to or something slightly different. Thank you.
So I think that covers the action required in relation to Quality Bus Partnership, because there's no such thing. We need to find out where the successor mechanism comes through. Mrs. Broom?
So I realise that people will have been reading things quickly, just as I have been, and I think what you're being asked to do is to take into consideration the comments made about this long list of things. One of the comments made about the Quality Bus Partnership, and this might be a reflection of the fact that there's change, is that it hasn't met recently, and there's an appetite to be more proactive in terms of what the Bus Quality Partnership would have covered or its successor will cover. So I think maybe it's a little bit, I'm not sure it takes things forward, discussing whether it exists in its old form or its new form. All you're asked to do is to take the comments into consideration. You may want to do that, you may not want to do that. And I'm sure that the officers who've attended all the policy advisory committees, and particularly this one, will have made a note of exactly what those comments were. So my suggestion would be, if you want to take this recommendation on board, you then ask us to be explicit in our next update report about how consideration has been given to those topics. If you don't want us to, then don't take on board the recommendation from this pack.
it's getting quite frustrating, this, because this is not the first time we've discussed this, and yet there is no progress. So if we need to make a very explicit instruction that we want a report in front of Cabinet in public for our next meeting on the issue of the succession of the quality bus partnership, then I think that's what we're going to ask for, because it has been talked about numerous times in informal Cabinet and publicly at PAC meetings, and yet, you know, we're being asked to ask for it. So, colleagues, are we saying we would like...
Can you just make it the next ordinary meeting of Cabinet, in case we get some called for...
So I'll be asked to make that clear that that's the next ordinary meeting, the date of which would be what, Mr. O'Connell? Can you...
Well, it's currently September.
September seems reasonable, given the August break that is inevitable. So we will have that as an agenda item for the next ordinary Cabinet meeting, to have a written clarification of the next steps in relation to the succession of the Quality Bus Partnership. I would like to add to that and a provisional timetable for the work on the revised integrated transport strategy. That's how we pick up that part. If I'm honest, I'm less certain how to deal with the comments of urban heat islands. So we can note those comments, but I like to actually turn it into actions and, you know, translate that into the real world. But for now, we will note the comments about heat islands, and we'll have that report for the next Cabinet to actually have it on the table, what we're actually doing with regard to bus consultative arrangements, or whatever they're going to be called now, and integrated transport strategy progression. So is that seconded as a action from this? Patrick, you were the first there. Agreed? Right, unanimously agreed. Are there any other particular here that we are missing? So I just want to make sure that we have wrapped up everything, those specifics, and then the overarching of noting the action plan and the comments. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. By way of light relief, item 22, let's talk about the money, and I think this will dovetail immaculately into 23. Mr. Green, would you just give us an overarching summary of the update? And so this is the fourth quarter, so it's the outturn of previous year. It's a bit later because we've missed the Cabinet meeting. But Mr. Green, if you could just give us the headlines, I'd be grateful.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. The report, as you've just said, refers to the final quarter of last year, so the period to 31st of March 23. And for last year, there was a modest underspend of 212,000, as reported on page 239. Capital expenditure lagged behind projections, details on page 252, mainly because there were fewer acquisition opportunities for temporary accommodation and corporate property, but we've subsequently caught up, certainly on purchases for temporary accommodation. The report goes through a whole range of aspects of performance, including risk monitoring. I think the only other things I'd want to just draw your attention to is the proposed performance indicators for 23-24, which have all gone through the PACs and have been agreed by them, but you asked to approve them as part of the recommendations. And finally, in Appendix 6, you're asked to approve the write-off of some irrecoverable business rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. That's very helpful. Any comments, any particular points of concern here? We'll need to just sort of go through the recommendations, just making sure that we do those actions of business rate write-off and the like. No fresh comments? For my own part, I think we are very much looking backwards here. It's a very historical position. I think we saw it develop as we saw each quarter unfold. The final position, or the draft final position, is no surprise to any of us, and it's all about the next agenda item really moving forwards. So with particular note of some of those actions, particularly 8, I'm moving per the pages. Anybody want to second me? Councillor Cooper. Those in favour? That's agreed. Noted and agreed. And we can move on to 24 now, agenda item 24, which is medium-term financial strategy looking ahead. Mr. Green, would you just give us a starter for 10 just to get us rolling on this, please?
Yes, thank you. This report's the first step in updating the 5-year medium-term financial strategy and setting a budget and council tax for next year. And it won't be news to you that we're faced with a huge amount of uncertainty, particularly to do with the rate of inflation. The report sets out a number of assumptions that we're making at this stage on page 307 onwards. And making all of those assumptions, we're looking at a budget gap for next year of just under £1 million, even if council tax is increased up to the level of the referendum limit, which we're assuming for these purposes is 3%. So the report's proposing that as a starting point in the budget setting process, it's assumed that council tax is increased up to the referendum limit, and fees and charges in overall terms are increased by 5% to match what we expect to be the rate of inflation. That doesn't mean that every individual item within fees and charges goes up by 5%, but we need to target an overall growth in fees and income of that level. And the other assumption that you're asked to consider making is around how the council funds the subsidy that's required for us to deliver the Affordable Homes Programme. And the point there is that it's essential that sufficient funds are accumulated in the Housing Investment Fund so that when we're ready to transfer housing units to the Housing Revenue Account, we've accumulated enough money in the Housing Investment Fund. So the recommendations on page 300 to note the issues and risks associated with updating the MTFS, approve the assumptions in the report, particularly those relating to council tax, fees and charges in the Housing Investment Fund, and to agree the process going forward, which would mean taking budget proposals to the PACs in September and then to Cabinet after they've been considered by the PACs. Thank you.
Very helpful, Mr. Green. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be happy to...
Councillor Cooper, I should have taken visiting member first. Would you allow me just to bring Councillor Harper to the table?
Really, it's just to probably reiterate the point which Mark was just saying about the need to build up the housing fund, because with the 1,000 affordable homes, we're going to need to build a fund up ultimately of about £50 million. So it's £50,000 per unit, and 1,000 units. Now, I remember from previous discussions we've had at corporate services that the key point is we don't need to get all the £50 million lined up in the next couple of years, but at the point we go over to a housing revenue account, we'll have needed to have built up enough equivalent to £50,000 to make sure that that number of units is covered. And I think, look, with the building works in plan now, that's not going to be many years off before we get to that threshold. And from memory, David, you were at the meeting when we discussed this about 6 months ago. It's around about £13 million we need to have set aside for that. Now, we've got £3 million, which is good, and we discussed this at a couple of meetings recently, but there's still a massive gap to go to. And so I would urge that if we get one-off funding, as this report recommends, that all of those are put into this housing fund, so that we don't get to a point in a couple of years' time where we have to set up a housing revenue account because we've got the number of properties to meet that criteria, but we haven't been able to put aside enough money into the housing fund, when the only other pot at that stage, if we haven't, would be looking at our general reserve, which would be a disaster, because we need the general reserve, for a real rainy day, not for using towards that. So that's just a point I just wanted to, bring up, because it's something we need to think of as we go through the budget cycle in the autumn. Thank you.
I very much welcome your comments, Councillor Harper, because I do think you set out one of the key issues we've got to be mindful of. I'm not so opposed to using some of the general reserve to bring towards the housing challenge, so long as the general reserve is at least that level that is recommended, which I think is 20% of revenue or something like that, but I believe our general reserve sits a little bit in excess of that currently. And Mr. Green nods, so somewhere between what you're saying and the extra bit of the extra bit, I think there's halfway house. So the one-off sums, we kind of had this debate last year, didn't we? So inflation rate is at 10-11%. We were capped at 2%. By the grace of the government, we were given dispensation to move our council tax increase to 3% without referendum, but it still sat a long way short from the real world of increasing costs. And then the government, the Right Honourable Gove, threw us an extra piece of money, which, depending on who you sort of spoke to, was either called revenue support or, it was extra money, do whatever you like. But it had the potential of closing the gap between inflation and our revenue income, revenue costs. And after considerable debate, we used some of that money last year to address the inflationary pressures on our staff. Not all of it, and it actually only a smaller slice of it, and what was left went into the housing pot, if you like. So I am not in the camp of saying categorically those one-off monies cannot be used for revenue if it seems to me that they are sent to us by government to address shortfalls if there are, but it would be my ambition to put as much as possible into the housing pot. So I'm saying that just to say, let's keep our options open and not have a categoric assumption that we will never touch that money that kind of binds us at an early stage. Let's keep all of our options open, and I am very mindful of the difficulty of funding or finding that capital to subsidise the initial 1,000 houses that we are committed to. Very topical on national news this morning and yesterday, that pressure on temporary accommodation. People were talking about the implications of the local rent allowance being fixed for so many years and no increase. So I think it'll be a changing feast, but it's a lot more difficult, that 1,000 houses, than it ever was. So I welcome the report on the basis that all options are in place, all cost savings and budget savings that might be looked at will be looked at, but let's not commit ourselves to any one path yet. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with your approach. I'm quite happy with this report, and I'm happy to move as per the papers. All I would say is just on paragraph 2, and I'm not changing the recommendation, I just want to sort of make this point. Obviously, the fees and charges table, I think they are sound assumptions to work on at this stage. However, I would caveat that at this stage that let's not fix ourselves on any particular course of action with any particular charges. You know, we need to look at how we can grow income, and part of that might be increasing charges, part of that might be trying to grow the base for some of them. But I think in terms of how we move forward and how we start making projections so that we can make informed decisions on, you know, let's face it, no one wants to raise council tax, no one wants to increase charges, and everyone wants to spend a bit more money. So how we can achieve all of those aims within the context of these reports. But as I say, I'm happy to move as per the papers. Let's just not fix ourselves to anything at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Second, Councillor Cooper.
Can I just double check that by taking it per the papers, what that implies about the assumption of one-off funding as you would refer to it is?
So that's what was emerging as a concern for me, that what you were saying you want to achieve is not perfectly aligned with what is in the paragraph 2.40. So you may want to soften the wording in recommendation 2. So rather than approve, you may want to note, just a suggestion of a way of softening it, because I do think what you were saying doesn't align with what is in the exact drafting of the report, and to do just simply to adopt what's there now might then become confusing later on, with you thinking you've done one thing and having done something slightly different.
That's precisely why I raised it, because I wanted to be clear on that. So we achieve that by yeah.
And note the assumption at 2.4. So just 2.4 you want to know?
I think we can note all of the assumptions, because that'll be the working papers, but it's not an outright commitment to not follow an alternative if we see. Are we content with that? Does it do what it needs to do? Yeah.
Instead of approving 3.
Any issues with the same with regard to 3? But we're saying note on both of those. It continues the forward momentum in all regards.
Yes, sorry, Chair. In relation to 3, that was more about approving the process, in other words, the timetable and all the steps we're taking. So it would be helpful if you could confirm by actually approving that you agree the process.
It's just timing matters, that's not tying us to any direction. Right, so in summary, we note the issues and risks, we note the assumptions, and we approve the timescale approach. You're happy that that be your motion? Yes?
Yeah, I think even if we were to approve, which we're not, we're going to note, we're not tied to anything. We can't approve the budget now. Only full council can, but I think noting that is probably
but we'll
more
be accused
reflective.
later of changing our minds if we did. So let's be clear that all options are running. Was that seconded by you, Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid, or have we not got that far? Yes. Any further comments? In which case, those in favour of that? That's unanimously moving in that direction. Thank you. Last but not least this evening, agenda item 25. This is relating to the Archbishop's Palace. Once again, Mr. Green, I'm going to ask you to just give us the headlines, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Members will be familiar with the position with Archbishop's Palace. We knew for some time that KCC would be vacating it. The previous versions of this group have approved the idea of giving a period for of exclusivity to somebody to develop proposals. That didn't come off. We have subsequently carried out quite detailed market testing and have established that there is interest in the market in the Palace as a venue for weddings and events, and so what this report is proposing in option 2 is that we develop plans along those lines, and we seek to identify an operator, and if that process is successful, we would come back to the Cabinet probably in November with a proposal for an operator and terms for a lease.
Thank you. Councillor Harper?
Thank you, Chair. I have considerable concerns on this report, as I think I expressed to corporate services on the 12th. I feel one of the points is there's just not enough evidence to support some of the statements. Now, I'm a member of corporate services PAC, so I actually did see the yellow papers at the time, but there was no workings demonstrated in terms of paragraph 3.3, which is the options of the multi-use culture and weddings. Now, people remember who are on policy and resources a couple of years ago, when this came up, we had two options before us. We had the Balfour Hospitality proposal, which the council decided to give Balfour a year to go away and look into it, and the other option, and we had a presentation, if you'll remember, Chair, by council staff of an in-house proposal to have a sort of mixed-use culture and weddings included. And we went out to, and as a result of the consultation we'd done the previous summer to that decision being made, that had come out as the top choice by the public. The public had chose the mixed-use culture and weddings. Now, I'm concerned that we're embarking on a course of action where we haven't been shown enough information to substantiate a sentence where accordingly this option is unlikely to be economically viable. As you know, the wording actually says it's unlikely. We don't actually know whether that's economically viable or not. So that's my first concern. The other concern I would say is that given the last couple of years and the work Balfour's done, and I know they've shared a lot of their work with the officers, but the current proposal for a wedding and an events venue is dependent on a kitchen, and totally dependent on the kitchen. Now, I don't know whether from any of the work done by Balfour previously, looking into how they would use the building, whether we know whether there's likely to be permission granted by English Heritage to provide a kitchen or a large sort of commercial kitchen within the Archbishop's Palace, given it's a Grade 1 listed building. And I would hope that we have information, or we've had discussions already with English Heritage in the last couple of months to see if that's a likely way forward. Because if English Heritage turned down the idea of a kitchen there, then we're virtually back to square one. So I'd say I'm just quite concerned on a number of areas where I would have thought by tonight and by when this went up to the Corporate Resources PAC that we would have had answers on those 2 points. So I do have grave concerns, and I would have, what I suggested to the Corporate Services PAC was that we deferred the item to September to allow further work to be done. It would lead to a bit of a delay, but we are incurring the costs of the building, and given that we're looking for a long-term solution for this, I felt a couple of months delay to seek further information wouldn't, in the scheme of a 20, 30-year lease, actually be a bad thing to do. Sorry.
So if I'm understanding, the 2 points of concern are the viability, and then secondly, the planning implications of a commercial kitchen, in a nutshell.
Yeah. And it was about it was just about the sentence where it just wrote off one saying it was unviable, but no evidence has been presented.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Mrs Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember sitting in a classroom once, probably on a chair that you had sat on some years before me, and being told that it's very difficult to prove a negative, but generally the lack of evidence for the positive is the evidence, in fact, that we need for the negative. So that probably does explain why the mixed-use cultures and weddings is and I quote, accordingly, this option is unlikely to be economically viable. And you know, just the paragraph there, the preamble there, sort of does give me some explanation. I think, as Councillor Harper suggested, that there might be difficulty obtaining planning, that I see no reason, if we can't get the sufficient approvals for a commercial kitchen to move forward with weddings, that I don't know why on earth anyone would think that mixed-use culture and weddings would work, because part of it is the same. I see no reason at this stage. I have seen good evidence to support option 2, which would be to develop those plans of the palace as a wedding and events venue. Such plans do take time to move forwards, and I think we need to be aware that this is a building that will be best suited to the residents of Maidstone if it is occupied. It is a particularly expensive building to maintain, so whilst I wouldn't urge us to rush into something in a rash fashion, I do think we should be moving forwards, particularly as we had moved forwards with something else that unfortunately didn't come off. So we've already got a bit of a delay. So I would certainly support that we move forwards with option 2 as per the papers, Mr. Chairman.
So, Councillor Mrs Russell, actually, you wanted to.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the important thing to remember is where the position that we're starting from. We have this building. You know, it's the main reason why Maidstone is where it is. It's a heritage building. With a heritage building of this size comes a lot of expense. You know, page 324 is the steps that we took, obviously, to enter into the exclusivity with Balfour that ultimately didn't work, but that was the right thing to do with the knowledge at the time. The important thing now is that things such as business rates, they hit now. So we are incurring cost with that building doing nothing. We're going to just be incurring cost. I think the next steps that are laid out on page 329, it doesn't necessarily say that we would get the Historic England consent, but by following these steps, we'll know that by the end of August. It obviously can't say that this will be a completely viable option. There are risks that are, you know, laid out on page 328, but I think it wouldn't be in the interest of anybody that lived in Maidstone to do nothing with the building. We have to try and achieve a use for it, and I think also one of these options, the one option 2, which is the wedding and events venue, has synergy in the location that it is. Obviously, with its previous use as the registry office, it's kind of known for that already. And with that option, we were looking to have a bit more public access to the area, which we didn't have when KCC had that building. So I think that would be improved for the residents of Maidstone as well. So I would say that we have to try, and I think we have to give the go-ahead now and see where we get to this if it ultimately doesn't work, and then we need to have a rethink.
I think I'm very much broadly where you are and the way you've expressed that. I mean, concerning viability, we have the yellow pages in front of us. It paints a picture. If I were analysing this as a business proposition for myself, I would rearrange the numbers in a very different order, and I would come to the conclusion that it'll barely wash its face. and there is risk. So the viability thing overall worries me. But, and here is the but, what else are we going to do? We cannot stand still for a moment. That's now costing us £250,000 a year, that building. I'd rather have an activity in there that made potentially a small loss, but not £250,000 worth of cost. So we have to pursue it and pursue it, you know, in the most positive manner to make it viable and successful and fruitful. But let us be very realistic. The burden of that building in terms of, well, the business rates, but its upkeep and maintenance is huge, and we were protected from that for a long time because KCC had the building. The concern about the kitchen, I think, is a very real one, because I think in the history of this building it had been refused previously, putting a commercial kitchen in there for its historical content. That we might be in a very different world, and let's hope that that is not an obstacle. But I know and we're going back decades for those proposals, but previously a large commercial kitchen and all the extractors and all the rest of it was not something that was supported by English Heritage or whoever they are this week. But having said that, you know, we know that Balfour in his efforts needed quite extensive work, and I think he had a fruitful conversation with those bits. So I'm very hopeful, but I don't dismiss your fear completely. What's on us in front of the papers is to develop plans. That's what it says as the next step. So I really don't think we have any choice but to be positive and move forwards with this proposal, and give it our very best shot. And it actually could be turned into something very successful, but there's risk. Let's not be under any illusions. So we're asked to agree to develop plans. I will come to you in a second, Councillor Garton. Delegating authority, we often want to put in consultation with in these sorts of things, and similarly on the legal services thing, but more on the Director of Finance, Resources and Business. Councillor Garton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I missing a trick here, or am I somehow not seeing something? I can't quite see the difference between option 3.2 and 3.3b and c. I mean, yeah, B and C is probably a slightly bit wider branched out, but isn't that more or less the same? And then it still says, as Councillor Harper just pointed out, this option is unlikely to be economically viable for mixed culture and weddings, and we are asking at option 2 to develop plans for use as wedding and events venue. So how wide are we actually branching out in our explorative work? Are we concentrating just on weddings? Are we concentrating on seminars and weddings, events and weddings? I'm not quite sure about the difference between 3.2 and 3.3 BC.
Councillor Mrs. Russell.
So 3.2 is weddings and similar type events, so christenings, funerals, that kind of a thing, but it is that type of function. Where you're talking about mixed use culture and weddings, that's quite a different thing. That would be some part of the building would be an exhibition space or an art space or even a cafe. So that is the difference between those two.
For me, I'd sort of want to sidestep that a little bit, because part of the recommendation is to, where are the words, but invite offers from potential operators. And I think that's actually the point where a potential operator would say, well, I could do this, but I need to do that, or we could do that. That's where the flex comes, which ultimately doesn't rule anything out. You know, the broad thrust is weddings and events, and as you're pointing out, Councillor Garton, a lot of those other things could be tucked under that, but it would be for the operator to make that possible. Does that make sense? Is that sort of a logic to it? We're not really cutting off any options. I'll take Councillor Mrs Russell and then you, Councillor Garn.
I think the narrowing, but I would ask Mr Green to confirm, is because we were looking for one operator to take the building over. So when you're talking about a few different things going on, that would probably lend itself to a couple of different people. I don't think it was being split like that. It was very much, that's your building, one operator, do whatever you want to do in it, but take it as a whole.
Yes, that's exactly it. I think that it's a much more attractive proposition when we're going out to the market if we can say that you've got the building to use as you wish, whereas if we were to say, oh, but you can't use this space because it's going to be an art gallery and you can't use that space, it becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we need one operator, but we should give the operator as much flexibility as possible, with the caveat of, no, we don't want something as big as a boutique hotel or something. So if we are branching out to an events operator rather than specifying a weddings operator, I think that would be as open as we can go. And if that operator then wants to hold seminars or weddings or a combination of both, then that's fine by me. We need to do something with that palace, and the sooner we can get an operator, the better. And the wider we open it to a single operator, the better. I think our chances to find an operator.
A slight bit of cross purposes of what we're saying, but I'm very content that the recommendations actually lead us to where we need to be. So the only change I'm just offering to us to consider is on 2, delegated authority, blah, 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 in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services. Yeah. So an amendment to that, but otherwise per the papers I so move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mrs Russell. Anybody wish to say any more? Those in favour? Unanimous. That progresses that. Thank you very much. And I do declare we're at the end of our agenda. Thank you for your forbearance and perseverance, and I wish you all a good evening and close the meeting. Thank you.